Hi, welcome back to Danny Harris Arts. In this video, I'm going to be showing you the new process I've learned to make the eyes for my fish carving projects. You may or may not have seen the video I just done a couple days ago on this same process, and it was the first time I attempted it, and so it was kind of more of a practice run than anything. But I made some mistakes in that video that I'm going to talk about in this one here in a few minutes. But I'm also doing this as a standalone so that I can use this video as reference for future fish carving projects. I can just refer back to this video if you want to see the process of making the eyes. So if you have any questions about the process, you can leave them for me in the comment section below and I'll answer them as best I can. But I appreciate you watching. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up if you like the videos. So I'm going to get started. Okay, so this is what I'm using. This is just a regular old 3/4 inch wooden dowel that you can get at the hobby store, or you can get them at Lowe's or Home Depot or any hardware store, or you can make your own out of scrap if you want. I just thought it would be easier to just buy the dowel and it's already round, and it'll save me a little work. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make about 6 sets, and I'll only show one at a time so that you don't have to watch me do all 6 of them. But I'm going to do it so I'll have the future ones. But anyway, so I'm going to cut these off. The last ones I cut just a little shallower, about 1/4 inch or so. I'm going to cut these about a 1/2 inch, and then I will sand them down to more of a eyeball sclera shape. And so I want the edge of it not to be crisp and sharp like I did on the first one. I think that was one of my first mistakes, was the eye. It came right to the edge of this, so it makes it harder to add that sclera on there. So I'm going to keep it a little bit big and add a little bit of sclera to it. So I don't know how it's going to work out, but I'm going to try. I'm thinking it's going to be fine. So I'm going to get these cut, and then I'll get in and start painting them. Okay, so what I've done here is I had these 2 pieces together. I mean, it was one piece that long, and then I went in and I used just a little, this little cuts all fine bit, and just beveled around the edges of them, and then I cut them in 2 with the bandsaw, and I did that because I want to be able to, when I put them in the fish, I want to be able to move them around. But I'm going to have to go in and kind of make the eye socket concave also. Normally I left them flat with glass eyes and just put some epoxy putty behind it and positioned the eye where I wanted it. But this time, since the back is going to be kind of rounded, I'm going to fill that with epoxy putty. I'm going to round out the socket of the eye, and then fill that with epoxy putty, and then I'll be able to position the eye where I want it. So, plus it needs to go just a little bit deeper into the eye socket. So, what I'm doing now is I'm going in and I'm drawing the irises on, and or the pupils. I'm going to make them just a little bit smaller than they would be, because when you put that epoxy on there, it kind of magnifies it, makes them look bigger than what they are. I don't think the cornea of a real fish magnifies the lens because it's liquid filled. So, but this, once this epoxy hardens, it acts like a magnifying glass, and it kind of expands everything. So I'm going to do all these. I'm only going to show painting one of these, but I'm going to do all of them off camera. But so you'll get the idea of what's going on. So I'm just rounding that out. I'm not making it perfectly round, because the pupil is a little bit got a little bit of oblong shape. It's not teardrop shaped like some fish. I've explained that before, but it is round. So I think I got them all. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my Dremel, and I'm just going to go in and I'm going to hollow these out to a depth of about half of the depth of the eye, because I want it to have some depth to it. I'm gonna go a little deeper than that. Okay, so you can see I've got about 3/8 of an inch or so depth to that, and I left it just a little small, like I say, because the cornea of the epoxy is going to kind of magnify it a little bit. So the pupil is actually where the lens is in the eye, and on a human they're kind of magnifying glass shape, but on a fish they're round, almost marble-like. And I mean, you can't see the lens, but that's where it is. It's in where the pupil is. I wish there was a way to show that, because some eyes, when you're looking at them sideways, you can almost see the little bulge of the lens coming through the pupil. But I'm not going to worry about that. But once I paint that black, it'll have a good deep depth void there. So I'm going to do the rest of these off camera, and then I'll show you that when I get back. Okay, so I've got them all drilled out now, and I decided to do 2 of them. I'm gonna make bass eyes out of them, so I did teardrop shape the pupil. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I did make them kind of teardrop shape. But I'm gonna put those aside, and I'm just gonna do these crappie ones. I think I need to do that one just a little bit bigger. May have went a little too small on it. And what I'll do is I'll paint them, and then I'll place them on this, hot glue them onto this disc here, and then that goes on to my little rotisserie, but I'll show you that as I get closer to it. So I'm going to get the paints out and start painting. Okay, so I've got the all the eyes. I need to get these bass eyes out of the way here. So I've got all the eyes here. I'm getting ready to paint them. I'll paint one and show you and do the rest off camera, so that you can see the process of that. And in the other video that I did, I used a couple different yellows to make the background, but I was going through my paints, and I have this this Deco Art acrylic, and it's a metallic, but it's called Splendid Gold, and I think it matches my reference a little bit closer than the yellows I made last time. And I've got these right here off camera, but most of the crappie around here, the black crappie, have kind of a goldish brown eye, and if it's real cold or the water's muddy or deep, they're a little bit clearer, a little bit lighter colored, but I want to make this one more like this with the deep darks and with the gold kind of showing through. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to paint the pupil first, get the dust out of it. So I'm gonna paint down inside the pupil first. Just get it nice and dark, and this is just plain old black here. It's not a gloss black or anything, it's just black. And I may paint that twice. One of the mistakes I talked about at the beginning was on the other eyes that I did. I painted the pupils, but I also used some gold powder on it on the outside of the eye, and I accidentally got some of the gold dust down in the black, and when I filled it with epoxy, some of it kind of floated around and you can see it. And one of the other mistakes I made was on the epoxy, and I'll show you that when I get closer to that. But one of the mistakes I made was I mixed the epoxy too vigorously, and it created a ton of little micro bubbles in it. And after I mixed it, I would let it set, and all the main bigger bubbles would rise to the top, and then I would pop them with a torch. And I'll show you that here in a few minutes. But I didn't realize that gold pigment powder had gotten down in the pupil, and it was kind of showing through on some of them along with the micro bubbles. So again, you want that void, that pupil, to be pitch black, no reflections in it. Just like a real fish, there's no reflections down in that pupil. It's just a void. So I'm just going to paint the iris of these black, gold, this gold color. Go ahead and do a couple of them here. And then I'll go over here in a few minutes and start adding the black detail on it. Get this, I'm not used to working with the camera this close to me, so I got to make sure I keep it in frame. One of the things I've also done was I didn't sand these down smooth. They still got some texture on them, and I even went and kind of banged them on a piece of 80 grit sandpaper to give them a little bit of just a little bit of a texture, so they're not completely smooth. Because when I get ready to paint the black on these, some of the dry brushing I do will just kind of skim the top of the texture, and you'll be able to see that texture. Let's see if I can show you here. If you look real close, you can see a little bit of, you can see texture in that. So I think by leaving that, just not sanding it down smooth, is going to give me make it some of that texture show through in the final product, and just add a little bit more realism to it. Okay, so I'm going to start putting some black on here. And a crappie has a little bit of a bar through the eye. Let me show you again on this reference point here. This is the top of the head, but there's kind of like a bar that goes through. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stay away from the little gold. They also have, show you this again. They also have a little gold ring around the pupil. You can see it here a little bit. Real thin. And sometimes it goes all the way around. Sometimes you can see it kind of fades out here, comes back in. Sometimes like I say, it is all the way around. But on this one, it kind of goes around and fades out, comes in, it's wider over here. So that was the thing about glass eyes, is they're all so perfect, and they don't need to be. I mean, you can certainly make them thin and perfect around there, but it's not necessary. I think it's more lifelike and more realistic if it don't. So there's the bar. Now I'm going to start kind of making it fade out. I don't need where my paper towel go on. I don't have my paint shirt on. I know I'm going to, at some point, I'm going to rub it on my shirt. And you don't have to make this around here perfect either, because it's not perfect on the real thing. I need my thinner brush here. Okay, turn this over in the light where you can see a little better. And if you look real close, you can see I left a little bit of the gold ring. I'm going to come in here and define that just a little bit more. And I got just a little bit of the gold showing through on the background, the gold I put on. Probably can't tell it on camera, but it has just a little bit of iridescence to it because of the metallics in that the metallics that are in that paint. And I'm going to give it just a little bit more here in a second. Matter of fact, I'll do it right now and clean this brush off. I am going to take this cadmium yellow. This is Deco Art again. And I'm just going to barely touch that gold iris to kind of make it pop a couple places. There we go. See that? And then I'll do the rest of them like that, and I'll do those off camera and then show you the results when I get done. Then I'll be ready to start filling the, after they set and dry good, I'll be able to start filling the pupil hole with the epoxy. And I do that first and fill it to it's almost got just a little bit of a concave surface, and I let that cure, and then probably let it cure overnight, and then start building up the surface with layers of the epoxy. And the epoxy I use is Flex Coat, and this is a high build formula, and this is used for rod wrappings on fishing poles. It leaves a real thick, if you look at your fishing pole, you'll see the epoxy around the threads that hold the guide on, and this is it leaves a real thick coat on there, good tough coat. Once it hardens, it leaves it, I mean, it's hard, it's almost glass hard. This is relatively expensive in my opinion. For these are just two 2-ounce containers, and it was I think I paid $26 for 4 ounces of it, but I think it's gonna go a long ways. I mean, I barely even scratched the top doing the other set. But anyway, I'll stop there and get these others painted, and then when I come back, we'll be putting the epoxy on. Okay, so I'm going to, almost forgot, I'm going to put this pigment powder on. This is Pearl-Ex, made by Pearl-Ex, and this is Brilliant Gold. I'm also going to put just a tiny bit of this Pearl-Ex micro pearl. It looks kind of silver in here, but it just has some, it's more of a iridescent to it. And looking at the reference photos, there's just a tiny bit of, looks silvery sparkles in here. So I'm going to add that to it. It's just another level of realism to it. And I've got these tiny little micro Q-tips. Get this up here where you can see it. They're real tiny. And you can get those online. I bought these from Matuska Taxidermy when I was at the World Taxidermy Fish Carving Championship last year. And they're not very expensive. It's $8, and there's a ton in there. So I got 2 different sizes. These are a little bit bigger, but these are good for doing some micro work and doing some detail. So I'm just going to barely touch this to the this powder, and then we'll come in here and I'm just going to add a little bit on here. You probably can't even tell it's going on. And I'm just going to put it in a couple places. And then I'm going to take the silver, or the micro pearl, and I'm just going to put a little line here. And maybe a little dab over here. And I know you probably cannot see that on camera, but it's there. So, and then you might be able to see it better, but right now it's kind of strong, but once I get the epoxy on it, it will kind of tone that down a little bit. So, but these micro pearls, I mean these Pearl-Ex powders, I really enjoy using these, and I don't know how I've gotten along without them. And I've got several different colors of them. I've got this is a carbon black, and then I've got a duo green, blue green that it's a shift, and depending on how you're looking at it, it looks blue one way and green the other. And then I've got this also. This is just a little 12-pack of little small half jars or they're maybe about a quarter or a third of the size of these bigger ones, but even these are going to be last me forever. But just got several different colors in there, some blues and pink hues. But I'll be using those later also as well. All right, so I'm gonna get the rest of these painted, and I'll be back with you. Okay, so I've gone in here and I've repainted off camera. I've repainted the inside of the pupil black, just to make sure if any of that powder fell down in there that it's covered up. That was one of the mistakes I made last time, is after I messed with the powders on here and sprayed it with the fixative, it got some of the powder down inside, and it was sparkly in there. And this morning I went ahead and sprayed these with a fixative so they'll be set. So I did that off camera as well. And now what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to mix up some epoxy to fill the pupils with. And I'm just going to, and then I'm going to let it set for a few minutes so that it'll harden, kind of get semi-soft or semi-cured. Just mixing equal amounts of it. And the other place I messed up was I mixed it too thoroughly. I mean, I mixed it too vigorously. So I'm going to mix this real slow and steady. It's going to get some air bubbles in it, but it'll set, and the bubbles will come up, and I can pop them with a torch, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second. But the last time I done it, I stirred it real vigorously just to get it all mixed up good, and you don't have to do that. So I'm just going to stir it kind of gently here. So it's going to get some bubbles in it. But they will, the bigger ones will float to the surface, and I'll be able to pop them. So I'm just mixing it real slow here. And I think that's going to get it. So I'm going to let this set for a few minutes so that all these bubbles will come up to the surface. And then I'll have, I'll use the torch here to pop them. I mean, it will pop almost instantly. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so this is the disc I'm going to use. It's just a little plastic plate, and I'm going to hot glue these eyes around this disc, and then I'll later put this on my rotisserie so that it'll turn them vertically. And what that'll do is that'll keep the epoxy in a dome shape. So, but for right now, I'm just going to burn these or melt this glue and put these eyes on here. Just a little dab. Put them on. Let's see if I can do it twice without. Yeah. So the epoxy has set, and most of the bubbles have floated to the top. And I don't know if this is going to show, but I'm just going to, and just like that, those bubbles are gone. I mean, just real quick. I mean, I don't see a single bubble in there now. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some, I'm going to start filling up these pupil holes. And I'll just do one on camera here so you can kind of see what I'm doing, what I'm looking for here. I'm going back in the epoxy real slow so they don't pick up any bubbles. And I just fill that to where it's just barely got a little bit of a dome on it. And then I'll let that set up good, and probably for a couple hours so that it doesn't run out when I get ready to tilt it up on its side. And then I'll put another thin layer over the top of it, and then I'll put it on the rotisserie. So I'm going to do the rest of this off camera just so I don't bore you with it, and then I'll show you here in a second. Okay, the pupils have had time to set, and I'm getting ready to put the first layer on the iris. I've mixed up a new batch of epoxy here, and I've let it set for about 20 minutes. And it's become thick like honey, maybe even a little bit thicker. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully put it onto the iris, and I'm going to check it for air bubbles as I go. And then it's thick enough that the retention won't let it drip off the edge. So I'm going to put it on here and slowly move it to the edge and just kind of give it an even layer. And then I'll do all of them, and then it goes onto the rotisserie. You don't want to put a lot on this, just a small little drip, enough to cover, to give the iris a layer, you know. So you don't want to rush this part, just enough just to give it a nice thin little coat. And then as it rotates on the rotisserie, it'll kind of start centering up over the pupil into a little dome shape. But as thick as it is, it won't run off the edge unless you put too much, so be careful about that. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm using a flashlight to inspect it for any bubbles that may have gotten into it. And I've gotten a couple small ones, so I just use a toothpick to kind of pick them out. They come out pretty easy. Okay, so they've set overnight on the rotisserie and have cured, and I'm going to put another layer on here. This will probably be the third and final layer, and I do the same thing. I just mix the epoxy and let it set for about 20 minutes, and then just put another dab of epoxy on with the surface. And again, being careful, try not to get any bubbles in it if you can. I let this one sit maybe a little bit too long, but it's fine. It's better to be a little too thick, and so it'll stay on the eye better and it won't run off. But I'll do all these, and then it goes back on a rotisserie, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, so you saw me put the third layer of epoxy on here, and I put them on my little rotisserie here to let them turn. And what that does is that keeps the epoxy centered over the pupil, and it also forms the cornea at the same time. I don't know if you can see the little cornea bulges or not, but in the apparatus I've got here, it's simple. I just got an old barbecue grill rotisserie, and with a screw coming through the shaft here, it's held on by this bolt, and I can take the whole plate off, and it's just a simple little 2x4 frame. And right now I've got it set up at an angle so that the epoxy will kind of stay centered over the pupil and form that cornea. So you can see it just turns real slow. This has been turning for about 8 hours, 10 hours or so maybe, and I'm going to let it turn for a couple more hours to make sure it's completely cured. And then actually I'll let it set overnight, one more night, just to harden, and then I'll mount them in the crappie. So you see I've got a couple here that I've done for bass. I've got a couple here that I've done for white crappie, and the rest of these right here or for black crappie, and I'll pick out the 2 best ones and use them in this project I'm doing right now. But I just did the bass, and the white crappie is kind of practice. I'm sure on the next project I'll make more. These are relatively inexpensive to make, so it doesn't hurt to make 6 or 7 or 8 of them to in case you mess one up, you got some in reserve. Okay, I've got the eyes off the rotisserie now. They're all cured. They've been on for about 12 hours. They need about 10 more hours. I'm gonna let them set to make sure they're completely cured. But they can look pretty good, I think. You see they got a nice cornea shape to them. And what's best is no micro bubbles. So you can see I experimented doing some painting some bass eyes, and I got them just a little bit too red, and but like I say, it was just an experiment. And then I did some eyes for a get it down here when you see it, for white crappie. I actually like the way those turned out. I'll probably use those, and then the rest of these are for the black crappie project I'm doing. And what I'll do is I'll take the best 2 out of the group here and use those. But just to kind of recap here, one of the reasons I got into trouble on the last one was with the micro bubbles is I used a toothpick and I mixed it way too fast, and it just created hundreds and hundreds of little micro bubbles, and they just would not come out. So this time, as you saw, I used a wider stick, and I mixed it a lot slower this time. And what you do is when you mix this epoxy together and start mixing it, it turns kind of cloudy, but then as it gets thoroughly mixed, it's crystal clear again. So that's kind of one way you know it's done. But just take your time, do it slow, and you won't have to worry about getting those bubbles in there. You'll still get a few in there, but they'll be bigger and they'll float to the surface, and then you can use a little handy dandy benzomatic torch and pop it with a flame real quick, and they'll pop immediately. But let it set for about 15 minutes, and then it'll start thickening up like honey, and that'll help keep it on the surface of the eye without it running off. So again, just using the Flex Coat high build formula. That's used for ride wrapping guides. And I want to show you this glass eye here from Tohican, and this is one that I used to use. And if you look real close, you can see that reflection across the pupil when I turn it, and on a real fish you don't see that. The lens is of the eyes in the pupil, but you can't see it. It just looks like a deep void, and that's the way it looks on these, because I drilled it out so that it gives it some depth. Here's the glass eye. I mean, here's a clear eye, unpainted eye that you can kind of see the they mold the pupil in, and then but it's right on the surface. And that's the outside, and this is the inside. But because they paint it like that, it gives that reflection of the flat surface of the black. So that's kind of what makes it unlifelike. And here's the other thing that I don't like about them, is this is an eye for a largemouth bass, but if you were to buy this eye for a largemouth bass, it would look identical. And they're just, in real life, if you look at reference photos, you may find a couple that are this color, but most of the bass I've caught around here are darker, and they have streaks in them, patterns, almost like the crappie eyes here. And you may find some that have a little red in them, a little darker brown, a little lighter brown, but they vary. And these don't. These are all the same. So I'm not doing these anymore. I'm going to continue to do these. And if you have any questions about the process, you can leave a question for me in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer. Okay, that's going to be it for this project. I appreciate y'all watching, and I apologize for it running so long, but there's a lot of content that I needed to cover in this one. And I want to thank my friend Bo Wessman for sharing this technique with me and allowing me to share it with you guys on my channel. I'm going to leave a link in the description below to Bo's channel, so go check him out. Bo is a world champion fish carver. He does some beautiful work. You can learn a lot from him, so go check him out. And we'll see you guys on the next project.